So I went through, and I do this informally, or I do it for myself each year going forth, planning for the next year for the grants. But it's typically not till December that we figure out the amount that's available for granting. And then from there, I just keep a timeline of when I need to do press releases. The applications I get online by the January 31st at the latest. The items in blue are OCCIT as far as when applications are due, the review meeting, and kind of the process I go through after the meeting, including doing a press release and executing the agreements for each applicant that is awarded a grant. The red is the Metro enhancement, kind of the same format, just a few months later. And then June through December, I just am support for those grants, and in most cases, giving them money and sending off money to them. And then we start the roll again, December 31st. Yes?
I have a question. It's probably one more directed at Wyatt, but he's not aware of it yet. Somebody else can fill in the blanks. These two programs are funded by different sources, and I'm just wondering, are they in sync as to when the cutoff and when we know how much is available for granting?
Question. I don't believe we're quite in sync with your earnings. The hotel motel tax comes in, I believe, quarterly into the Metro.
The dumping fees, or tipping fees, yeah.
I don't know that we're entirely in sync. But what we'll probably do is look at what revenues have come in since that time. Anticipate about the same as before, 50,000, 90,000 for the CCIP. I know your questions are in sync, and I think that the payments come in a little bit different.
And we've been pretty good at estimating how much those are going to be, but we have to remember those are estimates.
Correct.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Michelle, when we see those numbers that David Lynn provided, those are actually the value of the money that had actually come in.
Yes, it's based on that.
And occasionally we perhaps advance still a little bit, but we try to get out of that phase trying to only allocate those monies that are already available to us. Occasionally there was a strong feeling that another project should be funded, and we, I think, occasionally have advanced into that. That used to be a little bit more common.
Well, and with OCCIT, these grant cycles typically run on the fiscal year, so July 1 through June 30th of the following year. With the OCCIT, we meet in March 1st to April, and those groups do start accessing their funds right away, because most of the tourism things they're gearing up for. So from a budgeting standpoint, the money's there. It just gets allocated in a different fiscal year. But then for Metro, any funding, any of the projects, the funding is not available till after July 1. Does that make sense?
I understood, I thought, about when it was available. I was wondering about when we are allocating it, and I think Doug addressed it.
Yeah.
We really don't know exactly how much we've got.
No, it's based on, it's my understanding as David went through it, is it's based on, tracking it up until that point, December, when we sit down.
And that part's for sure.
Yeah, and then estimating for the next 6 months based on where we were, and then looking also at the last few granting cycles.
And yeah, and I was going to say, it's probably a combination of things, not to put too fine a point on this, but one of them is comparing it to previous years and seeing if there's a trend up or down, and maybe that's significant. And also is comparing what we've acquired so far compared to previous years.
Yeah.
And see.
Well, and when you talk about trending, obviously OCCIT is based on the room rate. And there, a couple years ago, it was really, really high. Well, that's trended down. Additionally, with Metro, the tipping fees are dropping as well. And in both cases,
we're recycling more, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's recycling. But in both cases, I mean, and we've seen that, grants, where we've reported out that we're giving out 90,000, we've gone into contingency and funded additional grants. So, we are going into our contingency to provide additional
Do we have a
money.
percentage contingency that we're working with?
I don't know that. I'd have to get that answer for you later, but I don't know.
When you say contingency, to me, contingency is money that you know you have that you're saving, you're holding back. And I don't know if you're using it in anticipated monies that we have not yet received, which I think is different.
That's the question that would have been for the finance
Yeah, I
director. I'm not-
suspect that contingency does refer to anticipated revenue.
Okay,
So
so it's not
there's-
something we're sitting on.
Correct. And if there's some will of the committees to have a little bit of reserve set aside, that's something you can talk about.
It was my understanding that we did have some reserves set aside, that he would underestimate the amount that was gonna come in, that was the total. And so then that next grant cycle, we already had a little buffer in there. Because I know a couple times we dipped into that a little bit to
Well,
like,
in
That's my
some places,
recollection
there
as well.
were grants that got awarded.
Right, I was gonna say some of it.
And for whatever reason, those
Yes, back.
grants,
Yeah.
so it came back.
But that's risky. Guessing, it's like overbooking, and you're
Yeah.
hoping
Yeah.
some of them aren't going to really do it.
Well, and in most cases, the majority of them go through, the projects get done,
Yes.
they, we pay out their funds. And for whatever reason, there's a little quirk and that project doesn't go through. And in some cases, it has to do with the permitting or, the
Whatever.
project.
There's lots of
Yeah,
reasons.
whatever.
Lots of reasons.
But, well, I mean, you probably, you don't want to assume that there's going to be projects each year that are going to do that.
Good.
So, I believe, David, it was always a conservative figure to make sure. And then by the time we got to our meeting, either in May or in April, depending on which group, he had a much better idea of where the actual revenues stood and to be able to say, well, we can work with an extra 10,000 if need be. So,
Is there anything that we would want to have clarified and sent to us in terms of how we've actually been operating in terms of amount? I thought one thing, and that actually we tried to allocate monies that we had on hand, and sometimes we advanced ahead, but that was done more frequently in earlier times. I think we're doing it now.
So a little bit of clarification on,
Well, maybe from last year, maybe you could talk to David, whether the monies that were presented to us were monies that were already in hand. Do you know that? Michelle?
I would say, I don't know that for sure, but I would say that, like I said, by the meeting time, he had a more defined number.
Yeah. And just to see
That-
if we had a predicted amount ahead of time in there, I don't know that he was operating quite that way. So, and maybe just send a memo to us all as to what the situation is, or was.
As to how David was estimating,
Yeah,
and then, okay.
and you're right, he estimated conservatively, which is what he's supposed to do.
So, any other questions on the timeline? As far as a meeting date for each group, it is usually after the first of the year that I sit down and look at the calendar and figure out when commission's meeting, and hopefully there's a fifth week in there that I can sneak in a meeting because of scheduling. So, in looking at the calendar, I believe I put the OCCIT the first week of April because the last week of March is a fourth week, and that is spring break, so you don't have to worry about meeting during spring break.
Going just before this, Michelle, is this press releases to the OC News and the Oregonian for both grant programs. I'm wondering if we can't do a little better job of reaching out to the community other than just putting out the press releases.
Okay.
when I go around the neighborhood associations, and I go around to a lot of them, all of them, and I try to remind everybody that there are these granting mechanisms. So many times it just flies over their head. I think maybe if we had little handouts or something that we could at least give to the representatives of the CIC that they could take back to the neighborhoods. But I think that more people really ought to know what's available. For, I mean, just to keep the program
In the forefront.
exactly.
Okay. Yeah, that's easy to do.
Okay. I do, something on the timeline, different projects are a bit different when they come to completion. The expectation of the turning in of the report. In some cases, they're going to complete in the year. In other cases, it's just a project goes on beyond our yearly cycle. Is that identified as to how that happens and when the reports are expected to come back to you?
So in the agreements that I send out to grantees, it says, within 30 days of completion of the project. Well, and that gets done. Then those get included in your packets when we meet each year. And I try to identify which grant year that was because, if we meet in April, there's still 3 months that a group could still finish up their project, and you as grant members aren't aware of what's out there and what they did. So it does get included. There's just a lag time in it, unless you want me to change that and get them out. But there is that in the contract. They do have to have that provided, and I do track that as well, so that come next grant cycle, I can report on, and I usually do it on that spreadsheet the financial spreadsheet where I have each group and what was paid out if they've turned in an exit report.
It was on my calendar at City Hall, so
Oh, sorry.
I've been over at City Hall trying to get in.
I told her to record you as an unexcused absence. No, I need to be here. I need to be here.
I finally remembered I did have an agenda.
Well, I'll tell you something. I went to City Hall as well, and I don't know if have you met Wyatt? He's our new finance director.
Okay, I think have I met? Okay, yeah, you look.
Anyway, he was walking out of City Hall as I was walking up to it, and
The bad news for you is I forgot the Asian pears, so.
oh man, Marker is an unexcused absence.
So this is Carlotta Collette. She's the Metro Counselor and sits on the Metro Enhancement Committee.
My apologies for being late.
Well, we're going through discussing the timeline on how the grants are allocated and so forth, and that's too
Yeah,
bad.
and you were speaking of the exit report. So,
Oh, good.
I provide those where I can in your grant packets. It can be done in a more timely manner on a monthly basis if you want something to come out sooner. So, let me know.
So anything else on the timeline questions? With that, we'll go on to the criteria, and we're starting with the Civic Improvement Trust Funding. You want to lead into it, Michelle?
So, after each meeting the past grant season, both groups wanted to look at the criteria for granting. And I believe, OCCIT is fairly straightforward. It needs to be a tourism project, heads and beds. The Metro Enhancement is a little bit more expansive and broader. So, based on that, I don't know how you want to proceed on discussion, if you want to do individual grant committees and see if there's any changes on, or discussion items for changing criteria or adjusting criteria for OCCIT first.
I know Kathy Roth had one concern, and I think it probably would apply to both granting cycles, and that was grant requests coming from the same individuals on the same projects year after year. And that was a concern of yours, I believe. And I think probably have them on both. In terms of the Civic Improvement Trust, of course, I think that's where the antique fair seeks its funding from. And then I think the high school construction class that's come to us 3 or 4 times now, I believe is on mental enhancement. So those are 2 of them that come to mind.
And I think with William's suggestion that we maybe advertise in a broader scope, we could eliminate that problem.
Well, I don't know if we eliminate the problem because we've never been able to fill everybody's grant requests.
Right.
And so we'll be able to not fill more people's grant
With more applications, you get better quality, offering, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and in your packets, I included for each grant group, OCCIT and Metro, there's a sheet on funding history. So it shows, which groups were funded, when they were funded, what the project was, and how much, and then the total for each year. So you were able to see where we've been and where, if you want to make stipulations on that, or just as is.
Well, if we think that we're going to change the criteria there, we need to give sufficient advance notice. And also, I think we have to make some distinctions as to, I think this group is completely able to make decisions on the merit of the project, whether it's a routine project or it's a new one. In the case of the antique fair, if they don't get the funding, there won't be an antique fair because they just, they look at the antique as a revenue source, but what they actually get in revenue corresponds roughly to what the grant request is. They get a lot of donations, but it takes things to put into it. And if, in fact, we want to suggest that something gets phased out on a continuous basis, we probably should have that discussion and then and talk about how that might happen.
I'd like to engage in that discussion with comment that we have another program, specifically the hanging baskets, that have been perennially funded. And maybe it's just my personal philosophy, but I would like to see grant programs as not so much as a continual source for an ongoing program.
Right.
And I think that we were able to move the baskets in the general fund. And I'd like to explore, is there a possibility of us moving the antique fair to the general fund?
That'd be a decision of the commission. Well, I want to go back to the history. I think the first year was put on, it was a city project, and then the city, wasn't it? And the city asked it was not the first year?
Well, it's not currently a city.
No, I'm saying the first year.
So I don't know that it would be a
Then I think the city requested the chamber to do the event.
Yeah.
So the chamber does the event, but they don't fund it?
Precisely.
Is it entirely funded from this?
No, they get
Match.
donations and everything else, but
Right.
the cost of it, they regard it as a fundraiser, and the cost of it is sufficient that if it weren't for these
doesn't
monies,
raise funds.
It would raise funds. That's what I was.
Yeah, unintentional money.
By definition, it's not a, yeah.
Yeah.
In the case of most of the OCCIT groups, I see it, and you'll see in their budget lines, a lot of it has to do with advertising. To be able to pay for advertisement because it's so expensive.
I think I agree that it should be oriented more towards seed money, startup kind of money, analogous to that, rather than a perpetual funding source. So, maybe putting on a 4-year, 2 or 3-year limitation on repeat grants.
Okay, is it something that you want to make retroactive or not? Because if in fact
No.
you want to make it retroactive, we have to let organizations know that that's the case, because.
Oh, you mean the years that they've done that,
Yeah.
are counting in that?
Yeah,
I don't know, that would be subject for discussion. I think I'd be inclined to do so.
You could send a signal and say, we're going to start reducing funding, and in the future, you'll only be able to get funding for however many years you want to determine.
yeah.
Would there be
that
any
makes-
exceptions to that? Like
Well,
for the metro enhancement, the high school project?
I was saying
Yeah.
exactly the same thing.
Well-
The high school project is, they buy the construction material, it's not a fundraiser, they're teaching the students how to do it.
It's a
And I
different
think it's
group
I think it
every
is different, I
time.
agree
Yeah.
with
It's a
Yeah.
different project
Yeah.
It's a
usually.
different
Yeah.
project,
Usually,
different
you. Yes,
group.
Rocky?
Well, I mean, that's the thing, you can argue both sides of this, and that's why I think I've always come back to, we have to weigh the projects against each other on that given year. And if, because I mean, we may get repeat projects, but if they're the best projects, we should be funding them. And so I think that we have to look at it in that way. I guess one of, is this a general discussion of all the different topics with criteria, or is this one, are we moving
Well,
on?
this is one I know that, I know Kathy had brought up earlier,
Okay.
and so,
Couple of the other ones that and we're getting better every year it seems, but to me the criteria still is not connected at all with the scoring,
Yeah.
and that's always been a problem to me
On the
because
metro side, you're speaking.
I'd have to look at it to
Just to
make
make
sure.
sure.
There's definite projects where they fit the criteria, and then you score it, and it's really low, and you're like, wait a minute, that was, it fits every criteria, and then some, it just doesn't match. The criteria, or the scoring doesn't, you're not scoring on the criteria. So you have this criteria that they have to meet, but yet it's not affecting the score at all.
well, I think that we went, it turned out I wasn't at that particular meeting, I was out of town, but we went through a process, I believe, where people scored all the criteria high, and we took the total, and
Right.
the result was that they got heavily skewed. I think that's a cautionary note to us. It may fit one of the criteria very well, and the individual making the assessment may give it to 5 just because of that one criteria. I think that's okay.
Right.
On the other hand, some people are very, very clever and try to fit their proposals that fits all the criteria, but it may not fit it all well, any of them well.
Well, one way that I thought of looking at it is if you have the criteria, maybe even add more than 5 criteria, have more specific criteria. And then you give a point for each criteria that it was met. And then also points if it's a new project, if you haven't seen it. That way that might discourage people that come back every year and depend on the funding of the grant not to, because they will get less points for each time they apply.
I agree with that to a point. I think you could maybe expand on it. One of the things that as somebody puts together projects, spends capital dollars, I look at what the return is going to be, and particularly with regards to tourism. I think that the person doing the project, it's never more, cost justification is never more than an educated guess. Okay, but perhaps bringing that educated guess forward, we estimate the antique fair is going to generate, foot traffic of 10,000, and each person will spend $22 at local businesses, for example. So, having some information like that is at least, estimated with, what did they use? How did they reach these assumptions? And again, to your points, to quantify, did they meet the criteria, and what is our likely, I guess I'm assuming that our goal is to bring tourism business into Oregon City. So,
And it's really hard to show that, especially with the weekend event. But along the same line, I think with OCCIT money, we do have to remember that it is specific for tourism. That means it's Is it bringing people into Oregon City that wouldn't normally come? Is it bringing people in that are spending the night? And if it's not, it really doesn't fit. And I so much of it, Michelle was talking about how so much of it is kind of, a lot of the projects are asking for OCCIP money to kind of subsidize their marketing budget, which I think is fine if it's being marketed outside of Oregon City. But buying an ad in the Oregon City News, that doesn't do it. And I know we are funding that kind of stuff. So I think we need to be careful about that too. So the detail of how we really know if this is bringing people in, because just marketing it to people in Oregon City isn't showing that our money is bringing is if we're advertising out, if they're advertising it specifically out beyond Oregon City or Clackamas County, then I could see that being more of a use.
In not all, but in most, I've seen invoices come through for the Oregon City News, for the Oregonian,
Right.
but there's also the Clackamas County Tourism Board that they work through and get ads in.
They
that
do,
way.
yeah, and they'll do joint ads too, and a lot of those are outside of the county.
So,
But having cost that justification of, here's my projection, here are the things that I used to reach this assumption, at least allows us a view into their thought process and see if we think it's hooey or not.
Right.
And again, it would bring, to your point, it would bring up, Oregon City News, that's not going to cut it.
Right.
Which is a good point. I remember we did a car club or something, the car thing, and they're going to put billboards out on I-205. That's okay.
Right.
That's better than the Oregon City News.
Sure.
So, I think again, does it meet the criteria, and how can you project the payback? And I don't think it's really that difficult to measure. I mean, you can have somebody stand out and say, hey, are you going to spend the night and take a sampling? And probably get a fairly decent representative sampling at something like an antique fair. So it is doable.
I think they do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
and I know the Chicken Racing Car Club this year, he was explaining, they did an informal polling during the car show downtown, and were able to get numbers as to where people.
I for one would like to have that information.
Okay, and that's
that could be
typically on
included
the
in their
exit
proposals,
reports.
and feed us a justification for the dollars expected.
One of the points that I addressed in my article last time we were together is that over the years, I think we've voted for a lot of tremendous projects, but they're one and done. You come in for a weekend. You come in for one day of a weekend. I have seen very few projects come through that I would call add to the tourist or tourism infrastructure. Exhibits,
Signage.
those kind of things that fill motel rooms, and in essence, that's and serve meals and get people to come to Oregon City all other times of the year. And this is what I see as a part that's lacking. Now, in the criteria, I don't know how you would do it. In some other organizations I'm with, they would fund, in other words, there is an agreement written that, let's say that 15% of the proceeds would be reserved for those funds that go into a infrastructure need. There are different things, or you might get a bonus point in the ranking system if you're into an infrastructure need to try to put hospitality on the front burner over the long haul. And I'm not finding any fault within the project, except that in my mind they're one and done. They're not building anything that next year we have something to build on and attract more visitors to Oregon City. As I brainstormed and thought for this meeting, how could you accomplish? Well, I didn't go all through the verbiage about the grant, it's the trust itself. I don't know if that's limited by the trust. I don't know if that's a decision this group can make, but there has to be a way to, in my mind, there has to be a way to encourage and reward the applicants that are going to put some in an infrastructure need for the long haul. For example, I'm just pulling this out of last year's cycle. The interpretive center, the work that was trying to be done down there is work, as I saw it, that would try to attract tourists to Oregon City on the long haul. Ongoing attraction. Those are the ones that you attract from a larger area, and those are the ones that are most likely to spend the night in the motels and buy the meals and buy the dinners. And then, like I say, they're more than just one and done. And I don't know how we go about that, but that is a concern I have had, it's a concern I voiced. If we're redoing criteria and that's one of the things that I would like to put on the table.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think that's a very good point. And going back to the ranking system, with the ranking sheet, that could be one of the things. You would get a point for that. You would get a point for outside advertising, for, advertising outside of the city. And then all these things you would get points for. That's on the Metro Enhancement form, that was one of the questions I always had is, the rankings seemed kind of arbitrary because you might give it a 5 because you felt it weighted heavy in one of the areas. But what about the projects that met criteria? If you would just put a point for each of those in each of that category, then it would get a 5. So are we focusing more on just being heavy in one category, or are we looking at ones that are well-balanced projects that meet all the criteria? I think that's what we need to figure out.
I think you're going to have better, my personal opinion is you're going to have better luck in finding projects that are going to be heavy in an area that they have some area of expertise in, rather than trying to be an all-purpose general, make everybody happy type of project. So I wouldn't be looking for trying to hit every objective. I would be looking for somebody that hits 1 or 2 objectives really well.
So maybe a 1 through 5 for each of, say, if there's 5 criteria, we can rate them 1 through 5, what we think, and that becomes their rating.
Yeah. My concern is a lot of the, I guess there's advantages and disadvantages of objectivity and subjectivity. If we go with points, the whole thing is very black and white, and you don't need us making decisions. I mean, just put it in a spreadsheet and you've got your answer.
Well, the subjectivity comes in if you had you could rate each criteria 1 through 5. But it forces the thought process on us rather than just making a decision, oh, that's cool.
So how heavy is it in each criteria?
Yeah.
Is it a 1 or is it a 5?
So out of those, they might have a score of 25 rather than a score of 1 through 5. So what it does is it forces a process on us to kind of, we can be subjective, but we can't just arbitrarily kind of.
Well, I don't want to go back to that one situation where somebody scored everything on the criteria as all 5s, and they were taking the total criteria, and that one individual skewed the whole thing. But
Yeah.
With the points, so it got approved, but it got. I think this is where we have to operate somewhat individually. I mean, if you see they make this one criteria and it's an excellent project, I think you should be able to call it a 5 if you think it's so good in that one category that it's better than somebody else who's has several other categories.
Well, there's another technique that we could use. We could just discuss it. Is to say you've got a total number of points that you can allocate over all the projects.
Now,
You can't give them all 5s. You've got a total. You've got this many beans, and you can give this many, no many, and this, and you have to allocate your beans.
That's good.
Well, basically what you'd be doing is setting your own set of priorities. So you'd say, this is number 1, this is number 2, this is number 3.
And then proportionally attribute points as you saw it by your criteria.
Right.
So we
Or
might-
just rank them, and I mean, you'd have to have some scoring
But the point is, you'd only be allowed so many points to
Exactly.
distribute.
Yeah, so
So we
what's
should come
your,
up with like a percentage where if you rated everyone 5s, that would be 100 points. And we say you only have 75, or you only have 50 points in beans to use.
Well, I think that you could say you've got 50 beans to use. And if you want to put them all in one project, well,
Well, but the point
We're
is,
probably not going to.
if you have 6 projects one year and 10 projects the other one, you have to allocate the beans somehow. Maybe a percentage of the total beans that we can use. I like this beans.
you can maximize the number of beans per project. So regardless of how many projects, so you've got 10 beans
Oh my God.
for every project.
Good thing you already
Wait, did you do that whole process for the Carnegie Center? Remember the sticking the dot thing?
Yeah.
Amen, Rocky.
It's a bad, bad
Bring in a
scene.
sack of beans next time.
People had 10 sheets and they were sticking all the stickers on one thing.
I'm gonna make sure I understand you right. You've got X number of points that you can award over all the projects, and you can choose how you award those points. You could get all 10 of them to one, or do otherwise. I guess that's the approach that could be used.
Well, it would, I would say two things. One was, it may vary, how many points you have to distribute, or beans if you prefer, really does depend on how many projects you have. So if you only have 5 projects to evaluate, maybe you don't need 100 beans. If you have 7 projects, maybe you need more. But we ought to be able to say, well, there's a ratio to how many beans you need per project. And then once you find out how many you've got, so let's say you've got 50 beans and 5 projects, it's up to you as to how you want to distribute those beans. And if you want to put 10 beans on each project, well, okay.
I think it was the problem that we had at one time, because you're going to avoid your X number of beans. So you're going to be able to award the total number of beans, and you're expected to award the total number of beans.
Exactly.
So we're all going to be
And you have to
getting the
use all your
same total
beans.
of points.
You have to use all your
You have to
beans.
use all your beans.
And you can't get more beans.
No beans.
No beans
Michelle's writing down beans.
So the point I was making about the percentage, so let's, if you have 100 beans, and you say you're going to get 50% of the total beans you could vote, that would be an average of 2 point, if you equalize them, it'd be 2.5.
That'd be your
rating
choice.
1 through 5, that would be my choice. So, I can make some things a 5 and some things a 0, but, then that's flexible across all of the, the varying number of projects we're going to have over the years.
The other advantage of using beans as opposed to points
It gets a laugh.
is, well, not only that, no, seriously, is that we do sometimes grade things as a 2.5, stuff like that, where you can't cut your beans in half.
There you go.
Unless they're cooked.
That's Mr. 2.5 right there.
Yeah. Get off the dime, it's either a 2 or a 3, so that's could
Yeah,
be
but
another
it's
advantage.
not. I mean, I don't think it is sometimes, and especially if you're dealing with, especially when we had 1 through 5 and we had 5.
1.5 was too small.
Right. So that caused, the only way I could separate them is by doing it in more increments, because there wasn't a way for me to do it with
I agree.
5 beans.
Can we sell our beans here?
No, you can't trade them either.
Who's going to count them?
Wouldn't the, well, I'm listening to all beans, I'm listening to these numbers, and, I'm like, whoa. Wouldn't the same thing be accomplished? So, well, probably wouldn't. But couldn't the same thing be accomplished, for example, if you had 10 projects, every member of the committee had to rank those projects 10 through 1,
That's what I was saying.
and then simply
Average lengths.
average the rankings.
Yeah.
Or just
That'd be a lot simpler.
if you
I mean,
rank 1 through
I'm
10,
look-
the smallest
Now
number.
frankly, y'all could have 1,000 meetings if you want to, because I'm walking away, but I'm thinking, I wouldn't want to deal with that.
I know, I'm trying to figure out math for
No,
the-
yeah, but so everyone's number one would get so many. I mean, so
if
my
there's one
number
project
one,
was-
yeah,
yeah.
what number one in my list would be the same. I mean, would get the same, and then they would.
Same.
Well, on
same
the other
point,
hand,
whatever.
if, let's say that your top project, you awarded it 10 points. Your next project would be a 9, your next would be an 8, your next would be a 7,
So you
and so
reverse
forth down the
ranking is what
line.
you're
And
doing.
so the least project in the group, in your vision, would be the 1. Well, someone else may flip-flop all those, and you average the group, and you probably would have a pretty good relative picture of what folks are thinking.
Maybe that's easier
Yeah.
to do.
That's certainly an easier way of doing it. The only thing that it doesn't really do is say, if you had, that's imagining that those would step up or down, depending on which way you went, from 10 to 1 or 1 to 10, in a relative fashion. And yet, you may have 2 that are really outstanding. And I guess you could say, well, those are going to float to the top anyway.
Well, then
And
in
the
a
rest of them are losers.
in a citizen-empowered committee, that's where the citizens on the committee might have to have a little politicking going on to get them both funded, or all funded. I mean, you can't take the human factor out of the decision.
Right.
But don't we use those numbers also to determine the amount of funding, not just whether or not?
We
We
these
talked them
last
all
2
down.
years, we tried, what we found in our system is we find these things group out, and you might find the same thing in the average ranking. And so you find the average ranking, and you got 3 of them that are, say, 4.2, 4.4, 4.6, something like that, and your funding cut right into them, and there really wasn't that much difference. And so we tried to actually bring that down to a point where you had this grouping that everybody in the group could fall in. So we tried to ask people then, would they be able to cut a little bit? And generally they have been able to, so we've been able to fund more projects that way. But the intent there was where you have a clustering of scores, and they're really close to each other. Can we get that whole cluster up, since it is, well, I'm a statistician, but in the margin of error, maybe they weren't that different. You could have switched another member with somebody else, and one of those others would have floated to the top, for example. So we've done that. I mean, just by, and most people are willing to say, yeah, well, we can accept X
Most
minus
of them
2
are happy to
instead
get
of X.
something better than nothing.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So it seems to work. So that could still probably be done, where we see a bunch of them have real close scores, and yet the cutoff goes right in the middle of those scores.
So for clarification, is this something you're considering for both groups?
I don't know why we couldn't do it for both groups. I mean, does anybody think why the groups might be distinguished in that regard?
As far as the ranking
I don't know.
methodology,
Yeah.
why not?
Yeah.
So if we have 15 applicants, you would rank them in your order 1 to 15,
Right.
and number 1 would get 15 points.
Or it's probably easier to just say, everybody rank them 1 to 15.
And then
the
average them
smallest, or you don't have to average them, just add each.
Add them all up.
Yeah, and
See where it's.
so the smallest number is your number 1, because that means that one got more 1s and 2s, whatever. So it would be sort of reverse
Your
logic, but
highest.
it's a little bit easier numerically to say your number 1 choice is
Yeah.
number 1. And your number
That's
2
in the,
choice is
that's in
number
the
2.
ground rules going in, so everyone understands the system.
Yeah, so you don't have to average, you just add up, and the smallest number is the top rank, the next smallest number is the
Which
Yeah, you get the same rank.
Yeah,
You
you
get
get-
the same rank.
rank.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You just operate off the totals for the total
Right.
ranks. Yeah.
And then you can, within that gives you sort of the top choice projects. Then you get down to, gee, we could move another project in if all of you are willing to take
Yeah.
a little bit less.
Yeah.
You do that kind of,
So how could we incorporate the idea for bringing criteria into it?
well,
In the
then
ranking process?
we establish our ranking based on our interpretation of their ability to meet the criteria.
Mhm.
So we could do, our own sort of
Right.
numeric or whatever. We could say, this is really great at this criteria, not so great at that.
Yeah,
We can either do that by actual numbers, and I don't know how much you need to have for the record, Michelle, but you
I think
can
it would be
either
great
do
to
it
have a
that.
process if
Yeah.
we're all
And
kind
it
of
gives, it gives individuality to what we're doing. I mean, like I said, if you thought it was a great project, it was written, it only fills one of the criteria, but it's a great project, you still could rank it 15 if you wanted to. Or
Yeah.
1, whichever, we gotta make clear what it
You can make it-
is.
Well, you're always gonna have a 1, you're not always gonna have a 15, so I'd say
Right,
make
so let's
that
start
one.
with
So-
your number
so
one
you could- I mean-
project, yeah.
You didn't, it only fit one criteria, but you thought, gee, it's a great project. And you could give it a 1, if that's how you felt about it. And I think that individual decision-making is a good thing, really. I think the requirement is you can't give a rank of 1.5 to one and 1.5 to another. I mean, it has to be, you have to go through the complete struggle.
Yep,
You gotta go through the struggle. If
big
you're-
numbers only,
You got 2 of them you think are
no
the
fractions,
same, you gotta make
No
a
ties.
decision.
No ties.
No ties.
no half points, Rob.
No half points.
I've done it too, I've done it too.
So can I ask another clarifying question?
Well, half
As we go
point,
through
giving
this
it a half
process.
point isn't a tie.
No, if you rank 2 of them 1.5, it's
Well,
like
yeah,
1 and 1,
obviously,
2.
but I would, I mean, yeah.
Yeah. That's just that we won't give them half.
I mean, I use the half points to break the ties.
Well,
Well, that's why you do it, but
Right.
you're gonna be forced to actually rank them, I think, not use
Well,
half
which
points.
is fine if you have more than 5 points.
Right, if you're ranking,
Right,
you're,
and
instead
it
of
wouldn't
just
be a problem,
assigning
yeah.
points, yeah, exactly.
So, we usually turn the rankings in ahead of time, so it becomes a point of discussion
Mhm.
once we start the meeting. So after that, then it's to your discretion if you so choose to ask applicants questions. Is there going to be a re-ranking,
There could be,
There could be, I don't know what, I mean,
like we've done in the past?
Yes.
we've done that, sure.
yeah, sometimes hearing the project described might change your vote, might
Mhm.
change your ranking.
Do we want to put that ranking up at the beginning and kind of make that public, or do we want to
That's what we've done
have
in
our
the past.
initials and then hold
They,
back?
they see it at the beginning.
Okay. Is
Yeah,
that what we want
until-
to do?
yeah.
If we're
Well,
gonna
yeah, but
specially
don't you
re-rank?
think the questions should come first, and then if everyone's good with their ratings, the way, I mean, we give the ratings to you, they're on the computer, we have the questions and discussions, and if we at some point during that time want to change our rankings, then we can before they go up on the board, but I don't know about putting them up on the board and then having
Yeah, that's why I asked.
and then
because
having the
usually
discussion,
they're
we'll say,
there.
oh, yeah, now I've heard yours, I'm gonna take those, but I don't think we
You're
wanna do
going
that.
from a 3 to an 8.
That's what
Right.
we have been doing, but I agree that, I mean, that's how we have been doing it, but I
Also,
like
yeah.
not putting the
Yeah.
ranking up.
They want to
Letting
go
people
for
come in and
a
talk.
recess and then reconvene or something.
Well, this may be a little bit programmatically difficult, when we submit our rankings. And is there a mechanism where we can, each one of us individually, key in a change in the ranking as we have our discussion? Now that, I mean, it can be done, but I don't know whether.
Yeah, that would be something I'd have to talk with Nancy about.
Right.
Just put it on the Google Doc, we'll just take our phones and change them online.
But it's got to be stored and averaged somewhere. I mean, there's got to be a.
Oh, Google Docs would do that.
Besides, we get to use new software, learn a new trick.
Well, what if we don't submit our rankings, we just have our ranking as our own notes, and then during the meeting we rank?
Yeah, put them in after
We
discussion.
could do that.
Well,
And submit them
you
to her,
should.
and then she has to cut and
You
paste.
should have your rankings there ahead of time, because if you're going to make a decision there, let's say you have 15 projects, it'll take forever and a day to, I mean, we're going to be for hours trying to figure.
Yeah.
It's a good discipline.
I think my suggestion is, yes, you submit your rankings. Maybe it's not known to anybody what they are, but you have them there. The only person that knows about them is Michelle.
And I can already have them on the
She can have them
spreadsheet.
there. Then you can change
But I can
them.
make changes.
She can make changes, but you're committed to having the 1 through 15 there already.
Yeah.
Presumably, you're not going to change a 15 to a 1. I mean, that's probably not going to happen.
You're right.
Yeah.
That will avoid people, putting it off to the last minute.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You don't want the last
it works
minute
really well for
taking-
me.
We do that anyway.
I get it done by lunch that day. And yes, done. Exactly. But there is, by not putting the numbers up first and by sort of quietly, there's we lose a little transparency, and I don't know if that's okay or not. If that matters to anybody, that people don't come in seeing the numbers up right away.
I would prefer that they didn't see the numbers right away, just because that can give false hope. And
Yeah.
I hate to disappoint people.
Yeah, that's the worst of it, is if you drop them after they come up and talk, then they feel responsible for having lost the grant money.
Yeah.
So I'm cool.
Go ahead.
I have a question about, okay, so we decide at the meeting to change our ranking. So do we take an 8 and make it a 2 and make the 2 the 8, or do everybody drop down?
That's your decision. That's your individual decision. How you want to do it.
And that could be a recessed time.
I mean, that would happen to you only if you found out your one was really a lousy project.
Yeah,
and your other was great. I mean,
Wow,
so
yeah.
you're probably going to be in your 2 or 3 ranks together where you're going to be actually making those kinds of
Right.
decisions.
And I think it's pretty rare that we're
Make that
I think there's, maybe one time I thought about maybe changing it a little bit, or I didn't feel like ranking them until I heard the answer to the question. I mean, there's some that I didn't want to rank at all until I had the answer to a specific question, and then I ranked them, but I don't know that there's a ton of changes.
Or sometimes we'll get new information at the table that
Right.
then you think, oh, wow, that changes things. But so we might just have a separate ranking form at the table that we could then hand you for a recess if we've changed our votes. Yeah.
But having more specific questions too, I think would alleviate a lot of that. Like what Rocky was saying, like what you were saying.
Beforehand,
On the as the
process.
criteria,
Yeah.
on the process, just having very specific questions so that we have all the information beforehand.
I'm going to suggest that it shouldn't be that complicated.
No.
You could have, we all could have this individual spreadsheet, it's your spreadsheet, that you could change, and she can see your spreadsheet. Rather than handing her something, I don't think it should be programmatically that difficult to do it.
You mean during like a recess or something?
Yeah, we take a break, or,
Yeah.
and we could enter them in. I guess we could excuse everybody that made presentations why we made changes. I would suggest doing that if we're hanging pieces of paper too, right, while people are there and it's awkward. We could go ahead, hear them, dismiss people, make the changes we want to, and then call them back in.
Well, you've got
Now, they haven't seen the original ranking, so that's not going to affect them.
Right.
We ask them questions, we talk to them, we have the dialogue, and we have to have a meeting where this will work, but then we excuse everybody, and then we can go ahead and...
Isn't that all filmed? Don't we
Well,
record
it's all public. We can't make decisions while they're on the room, right? Is that how that works? I mean, we have the discussion with people there. We
Well, you're
each make our own
individual,
suggestions.
your own,
Exactly.
but then you call back, and then the results are
Right.
reported back to them. So you're making your own individual changes.
Right.
Yeah.
And then
So you're making your own individual decisions, but you're...
And
Yeah.
publicly, we still, in the open meeting, we still have the discussion with them about
Yeah.
changing
We
or
could-
bringing this
And we can have
down.
all the discussion is while they're there. When they're excused, we're simply doing our re-ranking.
Except the ranking.
Huh?
Except the ranking, the
Except-
actual ranking. I mean, that wouldn't be part of the discussion, saying, I'd like to ask you a question because right now you're a number 7.
No.
I think I'd like to make you number 5, but...
No, what I'm saying is we're having a discussion about their proposal,
About
what
their
we think
project,
about
right,
it.
okay.
We excuse them, we change our rankings, we're not discussing it among ourselves, I think. And then we go ahead and submit them, and then we could perhaps go through the same thing we did before. We see
Yeah.
how they group out, and maybe we get people to cut a little bit so we get more projects in.
Excuse me for just thinking a little boldly, is that it doesn't seem to me as we're the only community that ever distributes grants. I'm just wondering.
We know somebody here who is involved in that, Phoebe. I mean, yeah, I don't hear any comments from you on that. I think you're one of the best people to make comments.
I work for Meyer Trust, so we have a very different process than this, and it's actually much more closed. But we never share results until after discussion and research happens first. Actually, listening, you said there's some that you don't rank because you don't have answers to questions.
Right.
If there's a pattern of what those questions are, we
Right.
should try to include those
Absolutely.
definitely in the criteria ahead of time, and you mentioned that too, and in the ranking forms. Our process is very different.
Well, but what do you think of the process we're discussing, even though your process is very different? I mean,
I think the ranking works really well. It's always going to be subjective,
sure,
no matter what
yeah.
you put on. I think adding all the comments to the ranking form, so that individually when you're sitting down ranking them, that works. I would also keep them private and make the changes and not have everyone see the votes like we did last time. I mean, I think the recommendations that are being raised at the table now sound like they really make sense in terms of improving how it's working here.
Validation.
Is it important to have the ranking with our names? Or just have a sheet up that says, these are the project rankings based on the scores?
This is something I think we have our own spreadsheet. We don't see other people's spreadsheet. She has all of them there.
But what we've done in the past is we projected all of our scores and all of our ranking with our names.
Yeah, but that provides transparency.
Exactly, so that's what I'm saying, do we keep
I
that?
don't have a problem with that, actually. In fact,
I think it's a good thing.
I'd rather not do it prior.
Not put it up until after we've had,
Yeah.
Each of them has come in.
So
but
your
when
final
we
list
are
goes up.
individual
You
decisions,
can defend
ultimate decisions, then our names go up, yeah.
I
Is
think
it
also, we need to emphasize to everybody applying that they need to be there. I think there's
Oh,
it's
absolutely.
really a problem
I
when
do
there's
send
not,
that out.
okay, because I think a couple of times people have said, well, there's nobody here to, I'll speak to it, but I'm not official. And I think if they know they have to make a presentation, or at least come in and defend their project.
The letter I do send out to each applicant is that here's the meeting date. I don't say you have, I
they should
strongly
be.
suggest you be there, is I think
Yeah.
how I word it. We strongly suggest you be there to answer any questions the committee may have of your project. You don't have to give a formal presentation. I do note that. There's no formal presentation because otherwise, we could be there all night. But be there to answer any questions that are asked of your project.
And not being there may in fact negatively affect the.
Yeah, I think rather than say we strongly recommend you're there, that if you're not there, it could affect whether or not you get any money, period.
Yeah,
The other
please
thing,
be at the meeting to answer questions.
In a positive way.
I think and along the same lines of people not being there, I think did we at the last meeting, or the last discussion where we last year, I know we had some of these same issues, but I think we resolved the deadline issue, right?
Yeah, we didn't have any issues with the deadline issue by putting it at a 5 p.m. deadline.
Right, and then we had issues in the past with missing elements, letters,
Right.
et cetera. So did we address that too, I think, right?
Yeah, I review each application and make sure that they have the information
Right.
provided. Now, the one piece that's still, it's part of the grant information is you need to go to city departments and find out about your project. And that is one piece that's kind of hard to follow, because in some cases the projects are fairly nebulous at that point, and they haven't fully defined it and know which department they need to go to and what's supposed to be done. So,
Well, and that may or may not lead to the department having to take stuff I mean, are they just saying, what you're looking for the department is, each department that it's a sign off that, yeah, we're okay with this, especially if it affects anything on city property, et cetera, but, I would hate to get it to a point where the city departments were having to make a decision on 3 different projects that are coming to them and having to write letters for them or support and how do they deal with, that. Because they're not gonna be the ones, they're really signing off on it, not,
Well, they do
Supporting
actually, they do get letters of support.
no, I know they do, but I think sometimes that may be a problem if there's multiple projects, where they have, I don't know. I mean,
Competing projects to go into the same department.
right, I mean, is a department gonna say, well, yeah, I mean,
I like this one, so I'm gonna write a better letter.
right, I don't know.
I presume they're gonna have letters of support.
Especially when the project is coming from a department. And some of these projects do.
But we've been trying to pull that back.
Right.
I mean, we have been saying, no, you
So it's
can't look.
becoming less of an issue, but.
Yeah.
I can tell you that I do send out to department heads the grants that are up for review.
Right.
And ask if they have any comments to get back to me. And like last year for Metro, I didn't have any. And so that mechanism is in place. It's not a sign off per se by each department head. It's, let me know if there's something.
Right. Right.
But part of it too is as a grant applicant, when you fill out grants, you're expected to do so many things, and one of those things in our information is you need to find out if you got to go to building and you got to go to planning if it's going to affect your project.
No, I think it should. I'm not saying that. I'm just making.
I just want to throw this out there and see if anyone else is uncomfortable with this. I'm feeling a little bit uncomfortable having city personnel make recommendations on these things.
They don't make recommendations.
They do write letters.
But they do write letters.
You write, oh, that's true. Yes.
And I'm a little uncomfortable with that, because I don't feel that the city itself should be involved in that part of the process.
Well, I guess the thing is, sometimes they're a project on their property, and if you don't get feedback, I don't know how you, I don't think you should make that the criteria of accepting it. It's just a simple fact that the city staffer went ahead and said this is a good project and we support it. The person looking for a project may have back on to the department and says, we want to do something. We're thinking of finding a grant. Is there a project that we might put forward that the city really has a need for? I guess I don't have a problem with the city staffer writing a recommendation on it.
See, I do a little bit, and what I can see in place of that is just a check form. Does it match, or, is it going to work or is it not? Yes or no? Rather than a letter saying.
Support.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. No, maybe that's a good idea.
I think it would be useful, though, if they are supposed to call and get a sign off from the city, particularly if it's on city property, however that works, that the application includes some contact people and phone numbers, so they kind of know who to go to at least. Yes, who needs to sign off. I mean, you might not, there might be just a couple of key people, not drilled down all the way to the staff person, but just to get them started. So, especially if that's going to be one of the kind of the gateway criterion, that you've got to have this letter in your packet. It's got to be checked off. You should be at least give them some idea of where to go. Because some of these people, this is the first time they've applied. Some of them, the neighborhoods are getting pretty sophisticated, but some of them, it's the first time they've applied for a grant. And giving them a little bit of help with how to do it is probably a good idea.
Well, and I think too that the department should know what's coming down the pipe.
Yeah.
It's going to affect
So I'd like to know
the parks department, they need to know that bathrooms are going to, possibly built at the park. I mean, I think it's important to communicate that.
And we do have groups that do that
Right.
ahead of time, and the construction costs, they
Mr. Tucker does bring their kids to PAC and get sign off first before he even goes through the application to us. But we've had instances where there's been projects that have gone through, and it's after the fact that departments have to deal and make it work.
I'm just noticing the flow of the discussion has sort of gradually shifted away from the ranking.
Yeah, that's a good
I'd like to make sure that
So,
that.
does everybody agree with
Because I have some other topics I'd like to
ranking?
talk
Yeah,
about.
does everybody agree to the ranking criteria? I mean, is that straightforward?
Yeah.
Okay, for direction, then go ahead and proceed with that then.
And for both programs.
For both programs.
I have one niggly little question and one that might be a bomb. Well, let me ask the little one. No, the little one is, I just heard that magic time, 4 o'clock, and I know we went through this before, 5 o'clock, and yet have some of the staff hours shut off at 4 o'clock? The offices are open till 5, that's what I want to make sure of.
Right, City Hall
Front
is
desk.
open, the front desk is open till 5.
Okay, that's all
The
I...
reason, yeah, and 5 is, in the past it was, people would still be running in. At 5 o'clock, literally, door automatically locks.
Yeah. Okay, that's fine, that's fine. I just,
Yeah,
because I know
so
that,
that-
some staff has gone to 4 o'clock, I know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in my case, and there's always somebody at the reception desk, if I'm not there that day, that they take them in those times.
That was a little question, thank you. Here's another one, and this is way outside the box, but it's something that I would like to discuss. And that is that there has been an issue, a very serious issue, and I'm wondering if we have the means to ameliorate part of the problem. The problem specifically is that of trees uprooting sidewalks. Trees uproot sidewalks, there's a whole cascading history of why they were done, and the city's responsibility, but the property owner's responsibility to pay for it, and all this and all that. And the thought occurred to me that it could be possible for hardship situations where the person cannot afford to have their sidewalk replaced, and they can document that through whatever means could be done, that the city could earmark a portion of, and I would think it's probably metro enhancement, because it doesn't have anything to do with tourism, a portion of those monies could be set aside that people that find themselves in that situation, being unable to afford to remedy a problem that they didn't cause, but they're responsible for doing, they could appeal to that as a grant.
I would make a different kind of suggestion. And my suggestion would be, the city have basically a loan program. And if they're really in that kind of a situation, like so many things that, can be put on your property when the property's sold, you get the money back, as opposed to using the metro. I mean,
Okay.
there's for one thing, then somebody's gonna have to make a decision how much, and then if you get a whole bunch of people asking for it, then you gotta make a decision of how to rank them. And I don't know if you want to be in that position. I would think a far better thing would be, in fact, we've loaned monies before, and then we get some interest back, and usually the interest is relatively small. We've done that for South Fork. It was interest that we wouldn't get, but
Right.
so it was a benefit to us, but it's an interest rate that South Fork couldn't get from anyone else.
Exactly.
And so, we have reserves and so forth where maybe those kinds of quote loans could be made, and then I would recommend that maybe as an item, maybe for a goal setting session with the city commission.
Okay, that's fine. I just didn't know
Yeah.
if that would fall under the criteria, but if there's another method,
Yeah.
I just think something ought to be done for those people that can't afford to
I
do
agree
that,
with you.
and they're required to.
And
It's like unfunded mandates, that they're
Right.
supposed to do.
Right.
And it makes the city look bad.
Right.
if we can't.
Do we need Michelle here in order for you to speak?
Michelle,
I usually do okay.
But she'll pay attention, we need Go ahead, Marty.
This is a topic that has been a discussion at another meeting that I thought maybe I would mention now. Not sure that it affects OCCIT grants at the moment, but in the future it might. And that is the Oregon City Tourism Council that exists in the city, which is represented by myself for the city and multiple, basically all the heritage sites in the city, lodging sites, business, chamber, downtown, is a council that deals with the TAP money from the county, Tourism Action Plan. So the city Tourism Council creates a tourism action plan. They get generally $20,000 about from the county, similar to our room tax, similar to our OCCIT funds. And at that council, we've had similar conversations, how to open the grants to more people, how to build on, the tourism infrastructure rather than one-day kind of events, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's so many parallels with what the Oregon City Tourism Council does with OCCIT that I wonder if it wouldn't be possible to interact in some way as together, or I don't know really how to say this, but I think they're doing the same job, essentially. I think that there might be a way to bring those together in a way that's a little bit more cohesive, and actually I think in doing so might actually be an easier target for us to hit some things, because the Tourism Action Plan is very specific about these are the things that Oregon City wants to focus on in tourism, and so there is some pretty strict guidelines that any of the projects come to us meet those. So it's even a little bit more specific criteria than OCCIT, and it's the same people asking for the money generally, or the same organizations. And to me, the closer that we get to having all these organizations and groups that are going to get the money working together to decide to some degree how it goes, to avoid the infighting to some degree between individual attractions, because honestly, I think what's to some degree what leads to the one-day project, get my grant and be done with it, is because these organizations are all competing for these little pieces of money, rather than saying what can we all do as a group to bring people into Oregon City, period. And so the approach that the Oregon City Tourism Council has been making is, okay, we're going to decide where this $20,000 is, and everyone at the table is going to agree, and it's got to be unanimous, period. And that means that it's not any individual project that is outweighing another. It's how are we, using this money in the best interest of the whole. So it's definitely been a similar topic that we've had here. I don't know if it would be possible to even have a meeting even with the two groups to even have just kind of a discussion of how that might be connected in the future. I'm not necessarily even saying that it could go from anything to just sharing ideas, I guess, to somehow bringing those two groups together at some point. I don't know. So I leave that as a discussion to see if you have any input on that. Because I think what's happening is we get all these groups to compete for this money, and they're, kind of focusing on their own projects rather than really the question that both these money pots are supposed to be doing, which is bringing people in Oregon City, period. Not just focusing on, little teeny projects. We have some major gaps in how we deal with tourism in Oregon City. I mean, we have the Amtrak station where you get off the train, there's no one there, there's nothing there to tell people where to go from there. So spending, a bunch of tourism money on a couple one-day projects doesn't fix the problem. Looking at it as a whole group and saying, these are the things that the city is really lacking in terms of signage from, the freeway to these places. There's some great signage once you get into Oregon City, but you can't find how to get, so we've had these same discussions, and it might be neat to just have these two groups just to get together to have at least a general conversation about how they might interact in some way. Just a thought.
Just to let everybody know that project probably does, we're older than they are. We had our taxes before they did.
Oh, the OCCIT.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think the general goal is absolutely spot on, of having
Yeah.
coordination for
Sure.
the common goal of increasing tourism. I would want to go back and read the grant definition for the CID to see,
Yeah.
are there some limitations to that?
Oh, I'm sure there is, yeah.
Well, I think what I have noticed, and I'm kind of a newbie in some of this stuff,
And not a newbie in some of this stuff.
but the signs of cooperation were completely broke down. And it became many times the heritage community became a struggle within itself. Its own worst enemy
Oh, yeah.
is itself.
Yep.
Yeah.
And maybe it would take the neutral auspices of an invitation from the city or someone, just get people in the same room and talk together, because I'm telling you, I hear both sides occasionally, and we're not talking to each other, let alone one another.
Well, and we seem to make progress, and then something happens and it goes back, and I feel like in the last year we've made a lot of progress, but we just have to keep at it, because I think...
Let's go ahead and explore the possibility that the one thing having a joint meeting. I do want to make sure that we get everything
Yes.
covered here.
Maybe that's a broad enough subject that Metro could be involved, but it's big, we're talking about bringing people in from outside the city.
Well, in the county, it's bigger programs.
Right.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But that's the source of money that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Oh, it's the county dollars, okay.
Yeah.
$1. So maybe if we had, a bigger organization that could get a bigger view of the whole gestalt there, that they might.
Yeah, the TAP money is essentially the county's version of the OCAT. It's their room taxes coming to the various cities or the various communities.
What I suggest, Rocky, is one day maybe talk to Michelle and David Fraser to find out whether we can bring them in, but I don't think that should guide our conversations.
Right.
For
Right,
this kind of year.
absolutely.
So, were there any other major topics that we had? We seem to deal with the ranking issue. I want to come back because I think we need to make give some kind of direction, if not a specific decision, on the question of the same project coming up year after year after year. And I think if we're going to move that direction, I think we have a couple of responsibilities, one of which is not to make it immediately retroactive, but in fact to state that projects that come to us year after year after year I'm gonna say, I don't think the high school project's the same thing, because it's not the same project. They do it at a different park, or they construct a different facility, and it's not also a fundraiser for them. And,
That's the same group but different project, yeah.
yeah, so, and so, the indication, we might give the indication that subsequently, if you're coming back for a request, you can expect that we are going to be reducing the amount if you continue to come back to
Right.
us.
I think saying that if you get a grant that you're not gonna get, you can't really ask for, I don't know if we should limit. But, I mean, you could say that, or you could say, you know, you're not gonna get more money than you got when you came
Well, I would suggest that
the first time.
we might actually say you should expect it to drop.
Right.
Because we need to encourage them to look for other sources of money
Right.
in the process.
Right, and most groups have done that, weaned
Yeah.
off a little bit of it, and I think if they're making that effort, you know, that's a good thing.
But are we making a distinction between groups can continue, like the school group or the Rotary or
Yeah. They
Main
come up with different
Street
projects.
can come back year after year and get funded year after year, but not just for the same project?
Oh, absolutely.
Is that what you're saying?
Right, yes.
Yeah, 'cause I
agree with
think they come back and the school.
And that means more than just changing the name of the antique fair to,
Yeah.
to something other than antique fair.
So it's not maintenance money they're getting new project money.
Right.
Yes.
And I think the school could meet that.
Yeah.
By just saying,
Right.
especially if they're doing a different park.
I have a concern about the, just because it's been mentioned several times, the antique fair, and the fact that I think it's a really wise investment for the city to have that event. I think
But it's
that,
not the city's event, I think that's a different.
well, I didn't say it was the city's event. I said it's good for the city to have that event.
Sure.
And I think it's a good investment for the city to help that event. I don't know how we're going to encourage other funding for that event.
Well, if you look though, they have gone from 10,000 down to 9,000.
Right, I mean, they're making an effort to wean off, I
Yeah,
think that's my point. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yes.
If the antique fair continues to come every year and is ranked against the other projects and still is high, they continue to get funding. But I think as long as they're making the effort to back off of that each year, which I think they have,
Yeah, they're doing the
I think they
7,000
really
now.
have.
Yeah.
So I don't see really an issue with that.
Okay.
Well, you might be able to also encourage them to do something unique with the fair that draws in more
Right.
broader audience, like have I don't know what they do, but you might have an antique sale or an auction of a really cool work of art or something like that that they could seek funding for, as not just for the fair, but for this extra special event that brings in more people from outside Oregon City.
Well-
How many people attend that anyways?
A lot.
It's the largest single day.
It's a large, it's always,
Wow.
it's 10,000.
Oh,
10,000.
10,000, yeah, I mean, it's pretty big.
So I'm surprised the chamber or the Rotary can't just, I mean, if it's that big, it should be
Well,
revenue generating. and
well,
not
the
be-
revenue, they charge per booth, and it's just a case of how many vendors come in. I think they did raise the rates this last year.
And did they get a percent of sales as well? That may
No,
not.
I don't
no,
think so. I
no,
think
no, they
that's-
don't.
One of the granting organizations that I also sit on had it was Eastern Oregon Visitors Association, EOPA. Year after year after year came back for $12,000 to $14,000 for printing the brochures that went into the state kiosks. And long history, they kind of had the inside track on some of the money, but as resources tightened, the recommendation council that I sit on said, you know, you got to start looking at other ways. Well, as we started to withdraw funds, and we withdrew about $3,000 a year. Just, you need to be replacing it. All of a sudden, they this brochure went all digital. Now they have a mass market online that they have never created as long as we continue to fund. So some of the folks that come in for some of the advertising, the encouraging part is you can reach a larger market outside of Oregon City by looking at other alternatives that may in the long run, the short run, cost less dollars. And unless the money starts to disappear, you don't deal with the problem until it becomes a problem.
Right.
Right? We all tend to be that way.
Path of least resistance.
And I was surprised because I know the lady who's the director over there and completely blew, and now they have done a whole rethink of their badge and what they're marketing, and you're seeing a whole new advertising campaign come out because they decided they can step into the digital world because the money was going to disappear.
Yeah, we
So-
generally don't fund year after year because of that, to help people find other funding sources, not become overly reliant.
Or adopt new
on
technologies and the price goes down.
Yes.
Well, maybe it's just a letter, maybe we could just indicate through a letter of intent, without being very specific on how it should be done. If a project's going to come back year after year, the expectations that you'll be looking for other funding sources to supplement the program. And we can probably let the chamber know that they've been doing it, so it's not an issue. We're just trying to set an expectation without formally saying what exactly that policy would be.
I can see though that they're going to come to Michelle and say, what is this new policy? And what is it, what?
Because we're not specific, you mean,
Yeah.
about,
Well,
we're
we've
gonna
been
cut it to this
talking
much
about
and
it
this
for
much.
3 or 4 years, which is exactly why the chamber has submitted projects to less and less every year. People know that.
Right, but there's more out there than just the chamber.
Right. So I don't know that.
Well, maybe back
wording
to
it that
Carol's
way,
point about giving points for things, maybe you can give points to people that are asking
making that
less,
effort, yeah.
that are asking less.
Or you could write something in there just to say, we discourage people from considering this a ongoing funding source because there will be other people ranked, above you if it keeps coming back, or not in that wording, but something like that.
Your preference is given if you haven't received a grant in the
Right.
previous year.
Right, and that it's for different projects. It's not for the same project over and over again.
Projects.
Yeah.
So you guys are not speaking of putting any limitation on 3 times per project or
No.
anything like that? I just want to make sure. for
But if we're going to say preference is given, how do we decide what that preference is?
Comment that it's always subjective.
I don't think we have to say preference is given, but just more that this, please don't consider this an ongoing funding source,
I mean, one thing we might
so they don't
do,
count on it.
and of course it depends on
That's what
Yeah.
I'm thinking, we've said that
the
every year.
continuation on the project, but we do ask the question, and sometimes they don't answer it accurately. I'm not talking about the chain incidentally, but have you been funded before? And sometimes we have them say no when they have in fact been funded before.
Yeah, and we
But-
only added that question in the last.
But we could look at that specifically, and let's say we rank the anti-fare high, but then we then make a decision while they're there. However, we're going to reduce the amount from the year before if they haven't done it. As we can have that control ourselves in terms of the allocation of the funds. And well, that entails having a history of what they did, but that's probably not too difficult for you to do that.
Well, and
That's
that's
right here.
already-
It's all there. So-
Thanks very much for that, Michelle. That's very
Yeah,
helpful.
so, we can, we've got the basis then of saying, but we funded this many years and we'll not fund it to the level that we did before. And that might be the easiest way to do it.
The other comment that, as I remember the last couple of meetings, it usually comes from one individual, and it usually comes during the part of the meeting in which I think is a valuable part. We're trying to balance a need against the money we have, and someone says, well, if you're gonna have a ranking system, how come you don't follow the ranking system? So, if it's a 4.2 rank and a 4.3, whatever that system is, there are some folks in the audience who would say, okay, 4.3 beats a 4.2, therefore 4.3 gets it, 4.2 doesn't, and you don't negotiate. I think that, I don't agree with that, but it would be, I think that continues to come up, and so it's something that we may have to deal with at some time.
Well,
We've done some.
we've done the
negotiating.
negotiating, and that's, I think that's the point. Maybe somebody's come out of it and said, well, we had to cut down and we were higher than that one. The intent again was, when you've got things that are very, very close.
And I totally agree.
Yeah.
I was just putting that on the table for
Yeah.
everyone.
And since, I mean, that's been the argument we've had, but we are also having an effect on the way people are approaching this. The problem was in the last, probably 4 years, or at least maybe even 8 years before we kind of started changing that wording. People,
Just put that on the
I
table,
know.
because I've heard.
I think we just
That's
have to
fine.
be flat out and say that. I mean, if you don't like this system, don't apply
The
it.
need always exceeds
I
the
mean,
need.
just- yeah. This is, I think it's, the way we're doing it right now is the best it has been done for a while, I think, and we are doing some, we're getting a lot more new projects than we've had, I think, in the past.
I
And that's
have another mechanical question. Say we go in with our rankings, our individual spreadsheets, and then we listen to the presentations and we decide to switch some things around. And maybe we've got a $30,000 funded in our ranking up here that gets knocked down and puts them below the line and puts a $10,000 up there. So then we end up with another $20,000. We just move that on down the line?
Uh-huh.
That's what we do.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have another subject, and maybe it'll be brief, because I've heard rumors that the tipping fee is considering to be increased.
There's discussion, there are discussions going on. It involves, at this time, I think, only Forest Grove and ourselves. Portland also has tipping fees, but have they been involved in those discussions?
Yeah, if we change it, and we just met on this yesterday, so luckily it's still in my consciousness. And I even have my notes. And right now, it's at 50 cents, pretty much across the board. There's one, I think, that's at 65 or 75 cents, and we are looking at raising it. But more important, and I'm glad you raised this issue, more important for Oregon City and other jurisdictions is that there are actually two sets of funding that could be charged. One is in Metro's charter, and we can charge an enhancement fee that we can use for kind of anything we want. I mean, it's our charter, we created it, so we use it for things like this. There's also a state enhancement fee charge that the local jurisdiction could enforce on your own. And that could be up to $1 per ton. And it can only go for the direct vicinity of the station. So it would be for improvements you want to make right around the station. And it's defined pretty carefully and narrowly in state law.
So how much of the 50 cents is Metro and how much is it state?
It's all Metro right now.
50 cents is good.
Yeah, we just have, and it's been really unclear, and that's why we had a work session on it yesterday. We had our lawyers look at it, and it's not even defined very clearly in our charter that we are in fact not using the state amount. So if we were using the state amount, then the other jurisdictions could only require up to $1. So if Metro's 50 cents, then you could only do another 50 cents. But because it's specifically in our charter, and I think we asked staff yesterday, we're going to come back and have didn't make a decision, it was work session, but we were leaning towards saying this is entirely our charter, we can raise it. We actually can raise it as high as we want, because it's not part of the state law requirement. But by saying it's our charter, that frees up local jurisdictions to impose their own.
A couple of questions then. One is, how difficult is it to change Metro's charter? Does that take a vote of the people, or
No, it's
the board decision?
It's an ordinance.
Okay. The second question is then it's my understanding that Oregon City currently has the potential to get $1.50 per ton,
Theoretically,
theoretically.
yeah, if you wanted to impose the state version, it wouldn't go to this broad, a grant program. It would go specifically to projects at the site and in the general vicinity, which is also a
And
great
thankfully it
area for
needs
you.
it.
Yeah, exactly, you mean, I mean, it's a focus area.
probably
that
just
It's a
needs-
brownfield area, I'm sure we could find my
Yeah,
easily.
yeah.
What is the
Thinking, you know.
general area?
I don't know that, I'm not sure what the
Is there a
borders
radius
are,
or
but
something?
yeah,
Can you
there's
find out for
probably-
us and let us know
Yeah, yeah.
where those monies would
Maybe,
be?
maybe we'll be lucky and it's
Yeah, by pennies.
the area that's served by the transfer station would cover all of Oregon City.
Well, I'm not sure how broad.
Yeah.
So how many tons of trash do you dump? And she's pointing, no, I mean as an individual.
Right.
She's pointing out that our trash fees would go up.
Yes, exactly.
They would.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking, how much?
But I remember seeing that recently on a garbage bill thing, that
Yeah.
tipping fees had changed.
And we can change the rates pretty easily at the metro. I mean, not easily because we have to deal with all the haulers and the companies, but it has a negligible impact on homeowners.
On the individual.
Yeah, because it's region-wide. We can change it and it's pennies.
And it's really
To the local
no
jurisdiction,
additional, for lack of a better phrase, paperwork for the haulers and the tippers. I mean,
It would be a much more significant impact on Oregon City. I think that if it's if you require it at the Oregon City, I'm not sure, actually. I need to find more of this out. We didn't get down into the weeds about if Oregon City imposes it but nobody else in the region does, it's only on those tons at Oregon City, so it might force people to go to other places
Yeah.
if they're dumping, unless all the jurisdictions did it.
Are we gonna have a,
This is, well, I think this is an issue for you too. I kind of initiated this with David Frazier, and I went out and met the mayor of Forest Grove, and they have a situation where they've got this franchise, but they've got competition that takes it to other facilities.
Right.
And their fear is if they increase it too much, then if people are going to go to the other facilities, not to the metro facilities. So,
unionize.
anyway, so, but respective staff have gone in. David Frazier went in. I know, and you go in with him? So it was Mr. Parno. No, I don't want to say no Parno. Mr. Parno. I don't want to insult his golf game. Anyway, so they went in and they were the staff that were talking to the metro people, and I'm sure Forest Grove had staff coming in as well. But Forest Grove's concern was that their franchise hauler may lose in the process.
That was a concern of Metro staff as well, because some of the stations are owned by Metro,
Exactly.
others by private companies, Waste Management.
Waste management.
So Waste
Yeah, it's a
Management
big
will have
deal.
to take all of their
Yeah.
refuse to their stations instead of Metro. So
Yeah.
that's,
So we need to
Metro
be
monitors
careful
really
about
carefully.
how much,
So,
well, again, we can kind of adjust the rates so that the system-wide, we don't lose money. But we want to be careful that we don't, we could go, I think what was said was we could go up to like $6 a ton if we wanted to of enhancement fee, but why would you do that? It would mean you'd lose that much tonnage. So we're looking at something more like $1, going up from 50 cents to $1, which would basically cover the inflation of the, since we've had the site. So I think that's where we're likely to end up, but I can't say.
So it's still
for
in
sure.
flux.
Yep,
Got it.
yep. But it's definitely on the top of a lot of people's mind right now.
I'm thinking about it. Yep.
Yeah.
okay.
Sorry.
Okay. The Oregon City Civic Grant people, in terms of the grant funding discussion that we've had on the criteria, has everybody got everything out there that they wanted at this point for Michelle to look at? Okay?
I have no other agenda items.
Well, yeah. And agenda item 4, we want to make sure that we got this clarified that, okay, all those that are on the Metro Enhancement Fee Committee have all your criteria concerns being dealt with.
These are the ones that we made consistent with North and Central, right?
Yes,
Okay.
these are within
I think, again, we are exploring the whole concept of enhancement grants and the way the different programs are running, so that we might be coming back up at some point with a proposal for change. But I'm guessing this is not going to change. The problem with some of both Central and North and the St. John's site is that Metro operates the grants programs. And so we have to take our overhead out of it, and it ends up, one of them only gets like $10,000 or $20,000 a year, and that's our overhead. So we're trying to figure out a different way to operate those. But you guys, you do the program yourself, so that saves us having to take any money off the top. So I think this one is a good program.
So I was going backwards to make sure there was no other things. I mean, we're beyond that on the agenda item, but I just wanted to make sure that was behind us. All right. Apparently we made a decision regarding the ranking system. And I didn't see, it seemed like there was no divergence in terms of the OCCIT and the Metro enhancement on those. I mean, that idea of actually everybody ranking and working off the average ranks would be the basis.
Average ranks or cumulative ranks?
Cumulative ranks.
Well, excuse me, it's the same thing. I just don't divide by the number of people.
Yeah,
I mean, it doesn't change it, it just is a little bit more work to divide by.
I was going to say, I don't know if there is a difference, but you would know.
But I'll tell you what becomes important, is everybody has to rank every one, or then it is a problem.
Yeah, you can't just say,
So
I don't like
because-
any of the rest of them.
And so if you don't rank every one of them, it will have to go to an average rank.
Yeah.
That's the only way it would work. But as long as everybody ranks every one of them, then it's not an issue. We just don't want to change the sample size, okay?
Okay.
All right. Anyway. And it seemed, so, and this is, other discussion is needed. You asked some good questions in terms of whether we can get more money. The haulers, in terms of the recycle they pick up, do they get any reimbursement at all for that? I mean, obviously it's not part of their dumping fee, but.
You're asking the wrong person.
Yeah.
I should know more. I mean, the solid waste system is so complex.
Yeah.
My head is occupied with transportation and
Right.
my cities.
You're wondering if they get any part of that fee to help administer the cost?
Oh, they don't get the
collecting it?
enhancement fee, no.
No,
But
no,
the question is there a fee that's granted based on the recycling as well as the dumpage, right?
Well, that wasn't the question.
Oh,
My
okay.
question was, I presume that the recycling hauling for the haulers is at some level of cost to them.
That's what I've understood.
Yeah, so
It costs us.
it costs the hauler. Of course, they make it up by
It's dependent on the
increasing
market.
their fee, but,
Oh,
I mean, so.
they're making money.
Well, they're making money, but the point is, it's one of the reasons our revenue goes down, because not that, as somebody else mentioned, we're not having that much garbage dumped at the
Right.
site.
Right, but like when paper dropped, if that really affected
Oh, yeah.
the haulers.
Yeah,
So,
so,
And buildings, construction's down right now, so there's not as much recycled dry waste, building material stuff.
so we were really under 6 and 7, I guess, in terms of discussion of other topics. And is there any more things that we need to cover? I don't know, I think we've gone through the agenda. And is there any other things we need to do? And Rocky, I think in terms of use, it might be good to have a joint meeting with them at some time, and maybe
Yeah, I
we
think
could
that'd
have
be great.
Michelle pull something else. But that's kind of independent of the decisions we're making now.
Right.
With that,
Well, can I just
you can do anything you want, Michelle.
swing back here? So just to review,
No.
we've
approve both minutes, so those are going to show up approved for our next meeting. So your next group meetings, you'll be approving these minutes, basically. I will also include these prior year meeting minutes in your packets, so since it's been a year. I'm going to readjust the ranking forms for both grants so that it's, the projects are there and you rank them in order 1 to whatever, however many applicants there are. And then add a verbiage in there about, reducing the amount of requests over time, and I think that was the only one.
If you've applied it.
If you've, yeah.
Or you've
Is
gotten
there
grants
something
in.
about a representative being present?
Yes, I got that down in my notes. So, did I cover all the things? And I'll also have the recording too. That's so nice. Thanks, Renee. Anything else on my end?
One thing I just want to emphasize, with this ranking thing, we all have to rank them all. Even if somebody did and we averaged them, that person went from 1 to 10, it's going to bias the project because you're going to have a higher ranking because of that. So it's critical that going to the mechanism that we are having is important. We give the total ranking. It might be a little harder for us to do that. Actually.
Yeah, you have no ties.
Yeah, you don't have ties. It may be it may be much harder to do that, but we have to commit to it. And I guess everybody's here, so everybody that's involved, although we have some people that are perhaps leaving so we're probably going to have some new people coming in. But we'll make this clear to the new people coming in that they will have to rank everything. Okay?
Yeah, and thanks to Wendell for coming back for
Yes,
this. He
ma'am.
was surprised to get my email.
Yeah, absolutely. I was on the way fishing trip, so that's okay.
Any rules about.
I heard they weren't biting anyway.
All depends on where you're going, Jack.
Wherever it was you're going, I
No, other than to thank you for all your hard work pulling this together and supporting the group.
And then we'll put together a memo out to the committees on the